I am New York.
Yes, I'm New York.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
We are New York.
Welcome to Diverse City, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus LeBron. This month, we're heading to Gowanus, Brooklyn, a community that's surrounded by Park Slope, Carroll Gardens, and other affluent neighborhoods. Gowanus is both industrial and intimate. The near 2-mile-long canal for which the area is named is still very much alive with barges and boats plying their trade, while some streets are checkered with cafes and homemade craft stores. But there are two things bringing major changes to the area. First, the proposed 2010 Superfund cleanup of the Gowanus Canal that's caused a hike in property values and rent. Then there's Mayor Bill de Blasio's choice to make the area one of several city neighborhoods where developers could build bigger if they create affordable housing. On this episode, Zoned Out. What's at stake as developers ramp up their plans to forever change this waterfront community? Canal cleanup. Why is the effort more sluggish than the Gowanus' waters? And Art Attack. Fighting to preserve artist spaces during the pandemic. Those stories and more coming up as we explore Gowanus, Brooklyn. Gowanus follows a familiar Brooklyn narrative. That is, it's changed drastically in the last 20 years or so. In this case, losing many Puerto Rican residents who were once a prevalent population in the neighborhood before rezonings and gentrification. Soon, the area could change even more as the de Blasio administration seeks to rezone the neighborhood to construct thousands of units of new housing. Some say that will bring affordable housing back, while others say the proposal is a giveaway to developers. Our Shannon Ayala has that story.
Gowanus' famous, gritty old canal could be at the center of a rezoning plan that envisions a neighborhood abundant with parks, mixed-income housing, jobs, and a cleaner environment.
The overall vision for Gowanus is for an inclusive, thriving neighborhood where there's racial and socioeconomic diversity.
Michelle De La Uz is the director of the Fifth Avenue Committee, a nonprofit social justice group that formed the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. De La Uz is also one of the 13 members of the City Planning Commission that will vote on whether to pass the rezoning proposal.
I'm recused from any public process as it relates to the Gowanus rezoning.
The rezoning proposal stretches 80 blocks and entails bringing more than 8,000 units of housing to the area, including about 3,000 units below market rate. The plan also has environmental, economic, and other parts. While it's similar to other huge rezonings under the de Blasio administration, De La Uz says the context here is different.
There's been a narrative with the neighborhood rezonings under the de Blasio administration and that have expressed a lot of concern about displacement pressures as a result of rezonings. That's not what's happening in Gowanus.
Benton Heimsath of Open New York, an all-volunteer group that advocates for more housing of all types, believes that this rezoning is exceptional because it will bring more economic diversity to a neighborhood that's already been very gentrified.
Gowanus is, unlike many of the proposed rezoning areas, a more affluent neighborhood. There's more access to good jobs, good transit. It's a wealthy area, and many of the rezonings that have been proposed are in lower income areas.
A 2019 report by the Pratt Center for Community Development and the Fifth Avenue Committee says the greater Gowanus area has incomes in the range of $90,000 to $150,000, in stark contrast to pockets of low income and public housing. Glenn Kelly, a member of Community Board 6 and the Voice of Gowanus Coalition, opposes the rezoning proposal. He says calling Gowanus an upscale neighborhood is an exaggeration.
Some are saying that this is a wealthy area. You just have to walk through the Gowanus neighborhood to see that this is not brownstone Brooklyn. This is not Brooklyn Heights. This is not Park Slope. It's adjacent to both of those areas, but this is not a wealthy area. When city planning created the map for this zoning, they deliberately carved out 3 sizable public housing projects so that they could make that claim that this is a wealthy area. Have you walked through the area? It's warehouses and sort of low-rise, grandfathered residential housing.
A petition from Kelly's Voice of Gowanus coalition calls for a moratorium on the rezoning. It says given the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, quote, this is not the time to flood the market with a glut of luxury housing units while offering financial incentives and giveaways to developers. De La U sees the rezoning as potentially a force for good, but has her own concerns. Foremost, that public housing will be left out.
There's hundreds of millions of dollars in capital needs in the 3 public housing developments in Gowanus. And right now, the city hasn't articulated a clear strategy of how it's going to meet those needs for the neediest residents and the most deeply affordable housing in the neighborhood.
Kelly and De La U seem to agree that any rezoning should emphasize the cleanup of the Gowanus Canal. Despite its federal designation as a Superfund site in 2010, a cleanup is not planned to get started until this year, and with possibilities for more delays.
The city is dragging its feet. They are throwing obstacles in the path of this cleanup, and at the same time, pushing to rezone and develop, which is only going to complicate the cleanup.
These issues have come up in community meetings stretching back more than 3 years. That process was stalled by the pandemic. The city has restarted the Unified Land Use Review process, or ULURP. That's where the community, the Planning Commission, and City Council weigh in. Heinzap's Open New York group is pushing to move the proposal forward.
Especially now with COVID, with the economic sort of issues facing the city, this is not the time to be throwing out the work that's been done and starting from scratch.
But there are some critics of the city's plan to hold the meetings online.
This ULURP moving forward during a pandemic means that we will not have truly public meetings. A Zoom meeting where everyone is muted and you can only see the people who are presenting, that's not a public meeting. That's sort of an online lecture.
With or without the rezoning, one thing will not change.
The population's growing in the city of New York, although we'll see post-COVID what happens, but it had historically been growing. And there's an insatiable need for affordable housing.
For DiverseCITY, this is Shannon Ayala.
You just heard a little about how the cleanup of the Gowanus Canal is intertwined with the massive changes that are underway in the community. The 1.8-mile waterway was once touted as a means of helping the area. Now it's often referred to as odorous and ominous. Vanessa Monet tells us more about the history and future of this storied passage.
The mere mention of the Gowanus Canal conjures up images of immense pollution, but there are some who are doing their part to change that image.
When we go canoeing, many of us bring with us gloves and a mask, obviously, nowadays, but we always had gloves. And the reason why we had gloves is we would pick up things that we'd find floating in the Gowanus. Everything from plastic bags to bottles and other things that might be floating around the canal. Uniquely, this summer, we have not found as much.
Owen Foote is the treasurer of the Gowanus Dredgers Canoe Club, a volunteer-run environmental awareness organization that's been advocating for waterfront access for 2 decades.
Overall, our mission is to really reconnect New Yorkers with their harbor waterfront, not just the Gowanus Canal, all of New York and New Jersey estuary, so think of everywhere from Newark to the Upper Hudson. Basically, that reconnection then hopefully translates to environmental advocacy. Environmental advocacy, funding, restoration, cleanup, stop the dumping, all of those different things is really the essence of why we do what we do.
The dredgers are one of the most vocal proponents of the waterfront revival effort. That gained steam after a key aeration component of the canal, the Flushing Tunnel, was reactivated back in 1999.
What it does do is it brings oxygen into the water, which allows for plant life to grow and for life to sort of gather there again. Because there was a time during the 19th century the canal was so toxic that canal boat captains would drive their barges there just to kill all the barnacles on the bottom of their boat.
Joseph Alexiou is the author of Gowanus, Brooklyn's Curious Canal. He says the canal began as a creek that was dredged and has a deep history dating back to 1856.
It was meant to be a drain for all the floodwaters that would come up in the meadows and the fields surrounding the Gowanus Creek, which was this naturally occurring body of water, part of a wetland that was very inconvenient for the landowners of Brooklyn. And so it was meant to drain the wetlands, and it was also meant to be the exits for the sewers that would be sort of placed around that area around the same time as it was dug. And it was also built to be a shipping lane so that barges could go up and down into the middle, to the heart of Brooklyn and drop off goods and pick up goods and be part of the thriving commerce ecosystem that the city fathers of Brooklyn wanted to see.
But the primitive design of Brooklyn's early sewer system is, in part, responsible for the canal's pollution to this day.
The sewer system that they were designing made use of something called combined sewage system or combined sewage overflow. And that's when you have a pipe that captures rainwater and the pipes that catch sewage outflow, so the toilets and sinks and all the things that people throw away ultimately combine into the same pipe. And that combined sewage is supposed to go to a sewage treatment plant. During the 19th century, the sewage treatment plant is known as the ocean. And so effectively, the combined sewage overflow would go into the Bay of New York. However, there were also as many as 16 different outfalls or sewer openings into the canal itself. And that is because in order for combined sewage overflow to work, there has to be emergency exits. And so what that did was that it brought a whole bunch of raw sewage into the canal, which still enters the canal to this day. That sewer system is still ultimately in place and dumps regularly hundreds of millions of gallons of raw sewage into the canal every year.
Not only is the canal polluted with raw sewage, it's also full of toxic waste that was dumped into and around the waterway by nearby factories. This led the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to declare the Gowanus Canal a Superfund site in 2010. This designation, according to the EPA's website, forces the parties responsible for the contamination to either perform cleanups or reimburse the government for EPA-led cleanup work in an effort to protect human health and the environment and return the site to productive use.
The city will build 2 tanks, one 8 million gallon and one 4 million gallon tank, to capture as much of the street runoff as possible during the periods of heavy rain and pump that back into the sewage treatment system so that it doesn't enter the canal. And then the second thing that the EPA has planned is completely dredging the floor of the canal so they can remove the 10-foot thick layer of toxic waste known as black mayonnaise.
But not everyone is happy with the fine details of the cleanup plan.
So now, about 10 years after it was announced, the EPA is in the process of actually commencing the majority amount of their cleanup. They are rebuilding bulkheads in anticipation of dredging the sediment, historical waste from the bottom, and that's good news. The sad news is they refuse to provide any access. So consequently, if somebody was to fall in when the EPA is said and done, they can't get out. So hopefully they can amend their drawings and designs to at least include access ladders, if not floating docks and stepped surfaces to get to the water's edge so people can touch this nice clean waterway when the EPA is all said and done. You know, direct contact is what we thrive to serve as a mission of the Canoe Club.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Vanessa Monet.
Arts Gowanus, a non-profit that's been advocating for local artists for more than 20 years, has had its hands full keeping artists in their studios since the pandemic began. It's a tough task being made tougher in a neighborhood where the 25-year-old art scene is causing studios to go for a premium price. Valerie Gladstone lost her day job as a hairstylist on the Apple Plus original series Dickinson when the pandemic began. Then she was on the verge of losing her side gig, making art dolls, when the non-profit leasing her art studio to her shut down. Spaceworks asked her and 27 other artists to vacate the premises by mid-June.
I just couldn't see how, A, I was going to be unemployed probably for the rest of the year. B, in the middle of a pandemic, how do I go and look at space? How do I put other people at risk trying to find an art space? So I decided I would just wait and see how the whole thing played out. And then I would make my decision at the last minute. If that meant I put everything into storage and deal with it later, that's what I was going to do.
That's when Arts Gowanus swooped in to save the day. The nonprofit arts organization took over the leasing of this building at 540 President Street after the previous management company, Spaceworks, pulled up stakes on March 31st.
We worked with the landlords and we ended up being able to save those artist spaces, and in collaboration with Brooklyn Neighborhood Arts, we're moving into those studio spaces to organize programming and create a community in there that's safe and socially distant at this time, but it'll be our headquarters moving ahead.
Johnny Thornton is the recently minted executive director of Arts Gowanus. It's been a baptism of fire for him. As with many other sectors, Gowanus's burgeoning art scene was severely stricken by COVID-19.
Artists have been very hard hit by COVID. We're mostly entrepreneurs, and so when people stop participating in art and start not going to art exhibitions, not being out in the world, it has really affected us. There's a lot of artists that have had their exhibitions canceled indefinitely or postponed. So it's hit a lot of people very hard. A lot of people have lost their studios or haven't been able to afford their studios anymore.
Affordability is one of the biggest issues right now in an increasingly competitive area for arts studios. Arts Gowanus has been able to negotiate with the building's owners, PDS Development Corporation, to offer studio space at nearly half the market price.
The other spaces were at least double. They were like $700 to $1,200 for a space. Not 24 access. They were very closed in how they kept their spaces, and this is how we've always done it, so this is how we're doing it. If you want it, take it. If not, we got somebody else waiting for it, kind of attitude for all of the spaces.
So this complex offers different sizes, some of which are smaller, some of which are bigger. And the landlord has agreed to retain those existing price points for the most part. So it's still a little bit below what the price points usually are for Gowanus. And because we're seeing such mass vacancies almost, I think every landlord is hurting a little bit and wanting to fill those spaces.
Despite the success in keeping the building and the studio space, Thornton is concerned about sustainability.
And I do think that it behooves some of the developers and some of the people working to create creative spaces in Gowanus that are at a lower price point that offer lease stability. That's another huge problem that artists have, is there's no stability of leases. A lot of these places are month to month. And so if something happens, take your livelihood, sorry, you got to go somewhere else. And that can be detrimental to an artist's career.
An ominous fact for Gladstone, who is very aware that this current agreement with PDS to pay $450 for her 12 by 12 space is limited.
Now, you also mentioned that with the building owners, that they were saying that at least until the end of the year.
End of the year, yeah.
That things were okay.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about losing your space at the end of the year at all?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. They're big developers. They're in it for the money. I'm just hoping that they make so much money and they are so consumed with the rest of their corporation to leave us little artists alone in the basement of one of their buildings.
Finally from us, Community Help in Park Slope is the first Catholic nonprofit organization for the poor, hungry, and homeless in Park Slope. Located on the border of Park Slope and Gowanus, the organization has been a staple in the community for nearly a half-century. Crystal Lowe tells us more about their mission.
CHIPS was founded over 45 years ago by members of the St. Francis Xavier Church who were inspired by the biblical story of the Good Samaritan and the spirit of the Assembly of the Roman Catholic leaders to address relations between the Catholic Church and the modern world, commonly known as the Second Vatican Council. One of the many objectives of this council being to help the social and economic welfare of the people.
It was a men's shelter downstairs. It was a men's shelter which men came in and they ate, they went to sleep and woke up and they left in the morning.
Initially, CHIPS offered coffee, sandwiches, free medical consultations, and legal assistance every evening out of a small storefront. Eventually, by the mid to late 70s, the Franciscan Sisters for the Poor took over day-to-day operations. They opened a soup kitchen and eventually a women's shelter called the Francis Residency Program for moms and babies in need.
They can come during their last trimester and they stay for about a year. And it's a transitional housing program where they should get on their feet, find jobs, and hopefully save some money to get an apartment.
Janice Levy has worked with the organization for 11 years. She says that despite CHIPS's historical connection to the Catholic Church, the nonprofit is non-denominational.
And it's for everyone in the community, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Protestant, whether you're Baptist, it doesn't matter. Whoever you are, if you want to help, you want to come serve, Orthodox, whoever you are, you can actually come serve at CHIPS. It's all volunteer based. So we have volunteers that have been there for a very, very long time and they love CHIPS.
Levy says that CHIPS's proximity to Gowanus allows them to maintain close relationships with businesses and people throughout the community.
The Gowanus is such an up and coming area, so it's really nice that we're in sync with one another because we help each other out. They've been phenomenal with getting us deliveries. Not only organizations, family oriented, people that live in the Gowanus come and they donate to CHIPS every day.
But the pandemic has caused some of that assistance to slow. Many of those who help CHIPS are older and at higher risk to contract the virus. This has prompted the organization to create a pop-up kitchen that services anywhere between 200 and 250 people daily.
Being that we can't have people inside the kitchen, the stores donate meals, people cook and bring meals from their own homes. Rudder and Stone is one that delivers lunches to us. The Park Slope Food Co-op, when we're open, deliver U-boats every day for fresh produce and things like that. We have schools, synagogues. We are a community, and that's what it is.
Levy says that it's the community that is keeping CHIPS alive.
A lot of people, when they see CHIPS, they know that we serve the homeless, but we will serve anyone that's hungry. So you don't have to be destitute and homeless only. If you are hungry and you need a meal, that's what you come to CHIPS for. Maybe you work or for some reason you're down on your luck that day or you can come to CHIPS and get lunch. It's for everyone in need.
Crystal Lowe for DiverseCITY.
That's our look at Gowanus, Brooklyn. Join us next month when we'll head over to Inwood in northern Manhattan to find out more about what's going on in that part of our diverse city.